Hey there, Internet. Welcome to the Hard On Gear channel, where I discuss and review my used and abused knives and gear. Something that is very popular in the knife community is the idea of changing your folding knives around every day, every other day, sometimes every week. For me, I pretty much carried the same knife for months at a time. For the longest time, it was just the Recon 1 and me for 8 years, so I didn't really have much interest in getting any other knives because I thought that one served all my purposes just fine. And why would I want to change things up and alter my reflexes? Say, if you get used to manipulating a certain lock mechanism in a certain knife, it's going to operate a lot differently than a different one. So when you have to adjust, maybe if you were ever having to use your knife in some kind of an emergency situation, let's say, your reflexes wouldn't be there and perhaps you'd fumble it or drop it. That's just the way my mind tends to work around this stuff. A few weeks ago, actually a few months ago at this point, back in late August 2021, Rule Number 9 on Instagram, you want to check him out. Hell of a good guy, super positive, good influence on the knife community. Not to brag him up too much, but he's humble enough, I think he can take it. So he put this challenge out, 13 weeks, 13 knives, and essentially it's to carry one knife as your main EDC for the entire week, and every week to put something else in your pocket. I'll explain this in a minute, we'll get to that, but for the most part, I did follow this a lot more than I planned on it, and I carried one knife and used it as my primary EDC for the entire week, and then changed it up to something different the next week. Now, he's got a pretty good Instagram following of like 5,000-6,000 people, somewhere in that range at this point in time of December 2021. So this challenge reached quite a few people. I know the hashtag was pretty busy for the few months that it was active. I am not much of one for social media. I have no personal social media that I'm active on at all for the last several years. So the Instagram for the Hog channel has been a learning experience for me, and the use of hashtags is something I've always kind of detested. You're My Boy Blue on there was my first, mentor of the Instagram, and kind of helped me through and encouraged me to use hashtags and figure out some of this stuff. And seeing how Rule Number 9 used it for the 13 weeks, 13 knives, it's a pretty powerful tool. And I've attempted one little small one knife 2021 hashtag. If you want to let me know what your one knife 2021 is, feel free to use that hashtag on Instagram and post what your one knife would be if you could only have one knife. And it gave me a little bit of appreciation for how certain trends tend to take off and some don't. But his large following in this 13 weeks, 13 knives became quite a freaking thing. So for me, I basically stuck with folders, and in the one exception, I used the Esee Izula 2 just to finish out the 13 weeks. So I'm going to go through each of the weeks, and I'll explain what happened between weeks 2 and 4 here, and I'll tell you what I thought of each of the knives, and I'll kind of look through my Instagram posts and just double check what I wrote about each knife, because I believe I did do a post for each one of these. So if you haven't yet, check out Hard On Gear Instagram. I'm not a social media person at all, but I tell you, the knife community on Instagram is actually a pretty positive and drama-free spot. So there's that, and shoot me a message if you want any of these hog stickers on Instagram or at hardongearchannel@gmail.com. So for week number 1, I had a few weeks prior to this just got the Paramilitary 2 in S30V, the black DLC coated version, and this is an awesome knife, one of the most popular, if not the very most popular folding knife in the last 20 years. Therefore, I had to get my hands on one and actually see what all the fuss was about. And it's pretty much legit. It's there for a reason. It is phenomenal, feels great in the hand, super slicey, very light but capable and relatively durable. Week number 1 would have ran the last week of August, and towards the end of that, I got the AD15 in the mail. So I fiddled around with that for a couple days, and I planned on carrying that for week number 2, but I believe like that Tuesday or Wednesday, I ended up getting sent to Central Canada for my second wildfire trip of the season. So that kind of screwed up my whole 13 weeks, 13 knives thing, because I kind of need something very purpose-driven for those few weeks. And I can only bring so many knives. So to bring an extra 2 or 3 knives cuts down the other stuff that I can bring, because I kind of have a weight limit of what I'm allowed to fly out with. So what you have here between weeks 2 and 4 is the Leatherman Signal and the Mora Companion in carbon, which basically served as my EDCs for those 2 weeks. I also had the Cold Steel SRK and SK5 out there, but these two really were the main knives that I used. I also carried the AD15 that entire trip and used it quite a bit, and it was very impressive how that scorpion lock actually stayed quite functional. It did get some grit in it at some points with all the tree needles and dirt and saw chips and that kind of stuff, but for the most part, this thing held up very, very well in the field. But really, I wasn't really doing the 13 weeks, 13 knife challenge. So after I got done that trip, I decided to do a whole week with this as my regular EDC, just in the office/field setting I typically work in. So week number 5, I used the AD15. At that point, I had it in my pocket and as my main folding knife for about 4 weeks. And it's a freaking tank. It's a beast. It is large and it is not easy to fit in the pocket if you're wearing shorts or sweats or something like that. But just looking at my Instagram post here, I mean, I basically said that this was undoubtedly one of my favorite folding knives of all times. That was after carrying it for about a month. So pretty strong statement, but as you can tell, big fan of this thing, and I really do feel that this thing was built for my hand. Downside is it's not super duper slicey. It's a very, very thick, beefy, full flat grind. If you're looking for a folder that slices a little more like a nice slicey Spyderco, you're not going to get it in the 8015, but it's still going to cut plenty, and it's still going to hold up to pretty much any task you're going to put it to, just like any triad lock, cold steel knife, or honestly almost as good as any fixed blade. So after handling the Paramilitary 2 for a while, and then the 8015, I wanted to go back to what I've been using for the previous 6-7 months before that, which is the Manix 2. Now, when I started this channel, I had just bought the Manix 2 and the Izula 2 to replace the Cold Steel Recon 1 as my main EDC knife, and I had been using this as my only knife for the most part for about 6 months. So I had become very comfortable with the Manix 2 and the Izula 2, and very much fell in love with this knife, which I had picked out very specifically as my ideal perfect EDC folding knife. So while this felt pretty tiny in the hands after hauling this thing around for the better part of a month, I really, really, really love the Manix 2, and it still lands as #1 pretty much in my mind as far as folding knives go, at least at this point in my knife handling experience. But if you want to know what my top 5 folding knives were of the last year, you can check out that video by clicking that little banner up in the top right. For week 7, I went back to cold steel, and I have not EDC'd this knife since the end of 2020 when I got the Manix 2, only because this thing has, it's starting to wear down. I use this thing for a lot of forestry stuff and a lot of, well, I've batoned and thrown this thing. I've done so many things with this thing that you should not do with a folding knife, and it just keeps coming back. It's still plenty usable, but I did lose my left-handed pocket clip a few years ago, so I got used to drawing this out of my pocket backwards the way it should be and just drop deploying it like that, or I would just draw it and, you know, reposition it and thumb deploy like a normal person. But I got used to basically carrying a pocket knife the way it should be carried again, and I had not carried this again, or since that Manix 2 came into my life there last December. It was interesting getting used to this again, only because, you know, when you carry something for so long, it becomes kind of part of your hand. You very much feel like it's part of your body, and there's just a level of comfort and trust that I built up with this thing. It's muscle memory. There's no other way to say it. So it didn't really feel like it was that big of a shock to put this back in my hand. It's almost like, I don't know. I don't know how else to describe it. If you've used the same whatever, same old guitar for the last 20 years, you buy a new fancy guitar and you're like, it just doesn't play like my old one. Best way I can really describe what that's like. So the Recon 1 is just home in my hand, and I look forward to eventually getting a new S35 VN one. It just keeps slipping down the priority list because I've already got a Recon 1, and I really do want to try a lot of these other knives. But God, I love that knife, and anyone who is a big Recon 1 fan will know exactly what I mean when it just seems like it's got to be the perfect, just about the perfect knife. The Manix 2 just kind of is a little more presentable, and it's a little smaller, a little easier to carry. Objectively speaking, this is probably a better EDC carry, but I like this knife better, if that makes any sense to you. Week number 8, we went right down from like one of the largest knives I own, or the largest folding knives that I own, to the smallest folding knife that I really ever carry, which is the Benchmade 940-2. And this knife, out of any folding knife that I've had, I've probably carried this the most in the last year, but as a backup or secondary knife. It's almost always in my cargo pants when I'm at work, in my side pocket there, just out of the way. I forget it's even on me, but when I go to eat anything like I'm cutting steak or whatever, any kind of meat or something where I need a knife, it's nice to have that one on me, and it's just a good chance to get some use with it. And that way I can keep whatever my main folding knife and fixed blade, I can keep those sharp and use that to dull it up on plates and all that kind of stuff. So this was really the first week in week number 8 of me actually carrying that as my main knife, and bloody hell was it ever tiny. Every time I went to go and reach down, it felt weird not having much to grip on. It's just, like say, habit, right? I'm so used to carrying something at the very smallest the paramilitary 2 really was kind of a small feeling knife for me to get used to. It was interesting getting to use the 940-2 for some more general EDC tasks than I typically would, but I gotta say I was very happy to put it back in that secondary slot because it's just not big enough for me as far as what I want to carry for a main EDC knife. But again, the benefit of 13 weeks, 13 knives is it really does put you out of your comfort zone and get you carrying things that you might not typically carry. At least for me, it did that many, many times. But number 9, the CRKT M16 03BS. I am very happy that this challenge gave me an excuse to carry this for a week. I've used this on a couple of fires earlier on this season, and I did use it for a few different tasks, but I haven't beat this thing up too much yet. This is the Sandvik Steel 14C28N version, and it's held up very well. I think I've stropped this thing up once, but other than that, I haven't had to do much to it. Getting a little bit of rust spotting on here. It's a stainless steel, but like most stainless steels, if it's not LC200N or H1, it can rust. This has been left in a wet pocket and that kind of in a wet vehicle too, for the most part. I've actually put this up on my car visor. It's a little bit thinner, a little lower profile, and I've had that up there just as like a backup folder. So it's in a damp environment most of the time, held up very well. And as far as the actual use of this thing, for such a tiny, thin profiled knife, it feels quite large in the hand and it's super capable. And this thing is just a workhorse. There's no doubt about it. Like, this is, for the price of it, I think this is about a $70 or $80 knife with the Sandvik steel. You can get a cheaper version of this, I'm sure. A few different cheaper versions of these. But what a great bang for your buck. Hanky, but small, pound for pound beast of a knife. And using it for EDC purposes, you know, it's still somewhat fiddle friendly. The flipper's fun. It works very, very well. Oh, quite stiff as you can tell, but ooh, when you get her going, that thing fires quite aggressively. So it's fun to play with. The liner lock is not always a lefty's best friend, but it's a frame lock. But frame locks and liner locks, you can get used to them. Frame locks tend to be a little easier to manipulate with the left hand than a liner lock. Carrying this thing for a week very much only made me like it more. Then towards the end of week 9, I got one knife in the mail that I've been waiting to get for a very long time. And since the early inception of this channel, I wanted to get my hands on this LC200N steel, and particularly on the Pacific Salt 2. Many reasons why I like this knife. It's essentially the same shape as like the Endura 4, the same profile and dimensions. I've never handled the Enduras before, but very, very popular Spyderco model out of a million very popular Spyderco models. This one in particular is incredibly impervious to any rust or salt water or any kind of corrosion whatsoever. I'll be moving to different parts of the country over the next 5-10 years as I change careers. Ooh, that rhymed. But I've been around salt water for the first better part of whatever these 30 years of my life, and I'm pretty used to things rusting on me, especially the high carbon steels that I'm used to carrying, like my K-bar knives I've had for a while. So to have something completely impervious to rust that I could stick in a pocket when I'm working outside, pretty nice. And not having to take it out and dry it off and oil it up and all that stuff, it's a pain in the butt. And there's some cases where I just really like to not have to do that with my gear. So this thing is very, very slicey, but still beefy and tough enough to be able to hold up to a decent amount of wear. As you can see, there's some blade play. These handle scales are not the toughest thing in the world. It's just FRN with no liners. One of the other things I like about this is just the way it fits in the hand for, and I've mentioned it before, Filipino martial arts type stuff. I was watching Cali Center, and listen, you can have your opinions on different practitioners of different martial arts or self-defense people. As far as like Cali instructional videos, Filipino martial arts instructional videos, Cali Center stuff is pretty good to watch. Whether or not he's the most effective at whatever, you can have your opinions. I have mine. All good. Just saying, when I was watching one of his videos, it was a video actually talking about like what pocket knives he carries. And funny enough, is he carried the old H1 Pacific Salt 2. So that is, and the Endura, I think, in his other pocket, or another one of those long-bladed Spyderco knives. But it's interesting just because, well, this was one that I very much gravitated to because of the way it was shaped and the longer blade and the lightness and the waterproof part of it's pretty cool. But then to also have him explain the benefits of why it would be very good for, say, Filipino martial arts type movements and, say, defensive tactics or whatever. We're getting into some nerdy hypothetical stuff that people are going to start tuning out. But regardless, this is an all-around great knife that serves just about every purpose I would want in the knife, except that maybe it's not the most hard-use thing out there. But I still think this thing could take a beating. So I love this knife, and it's going to be carried a lot. When I was finished the 13 weeks, I actually put this thing back in my pocket better part of a month, I want to say I carried this, right up until I got the Super Freak here in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah, I want to say I probably carried this Pacific Salt 2 for almost 6 whole weeks. So out of everything I carried at the end of this, I think this is the one that I was the most excited to get back in my pocket. So yeah, spoilers. I was going to save that for the end. But yeah, so week 10 was a big week for me. Week 11, we had the SR1 Light, which showed up in the mail, I think around the same time or a little before the Pacific Salt 2. But I was too excited to get this in my pocket. I did give this a go, though, in round 11, week 11. I'm getting my words all tongue-tied here. This is, I mean, the SR1 Light is iconic. It has become pretty much the gold standard for, like, tanky budget knives. I think that was pretty much what I entitled my unboxing video, because I think this really is kind of the king of budget tanky folders. The SR1 itself is a little more expensive, comes around like $150 to $200 depending American or Canadian or where you're buying it. But this thing here for around 60, 70 bucks Canadian, 40, 50 American, that's a hell of a good deal for a knife that you could pretty much do anything with. It's, I don't want to say quite exactly like a fixed blade, but it might as well be a freaking fixed blade. That triad lock is ungodly thick. I mean, look at the blade stock on that. Yeah, so that's heck of a knife. A little too much for most situations, though, eh? And make sure you sand down those bloody scales around the pocket clips, or else your pockets will be destroyed within a day. I don't care about aesthetics and stuff, but I hate buying clothes. I'm pretty cheap when it comes to that stuff. It cuts into my knife budget, so I just don't like having my pockets ripped to shreds. But those clips are secure, let me tell you. Funny thing is, I got to go back and use this thing some more, because I just didn't have a whole lot of EDC tasks come up the week that I had this, so I actually didn't test it out a ton. So yeah, stand by for some more use and abuse on that bad boy. Week 12, I made a trip to the big city of Halifax back around this week 11, week 12 mark, and I picked up 2 knives, the QSP Penguin and the CRKT Rampart. Anyways, not my favorite knives in the world. Both Kami China produced, made, manufactured. Not my #1 favorite thing to buy and support, but I wanted to see what the Penguin was all about, so I did carry it for this week, and it's not bad for a small knife. This is really the only other small knife other than the 940-2 that I've ever really liked to handle in my hand and carry in my pocket. Very easy to fiddle with. The liner lock works incredibly well, and for a left-handed person, liner locks aren't my favorite thing ever. But this knife is very well built for the price. Makes you wonder how they do it in such a way that it's not ethical or moral. Anyways, I don't know, but it's definitely a good knife, objectively speaking, for the price. I'm probably just going to use that in some videos in the future to destroy and see how much it can take, and then do whatever, throw it away or use it as a channel memento or whatever. Yeah, we'll see what the future holds for this thing, but I have a feeling it's mainly just going to be a size comparison, and I might just see how much it can take and beat the crap out of it sometime. Then for the final week, week 13, I had a couple of folding knives I thought about using, like the CRKT Rampart, which is pretty interesting, but for a lot of the same reasons that I mentioned with this knife, I don't plan on doing much with this other than using it for size comparisons, and just to get a taste of a couple of these small Chinese-owned brands that I just never tried before, because typically made in China stuff has always been very cheap, but these brands have had a very impressive reputation for putting out very high quality stuff for not a lot of money. Again, how they do that, I don't know exactly, but it's interesting to look at, and at least now I know. So the other knives that I thought about maybe putting in the pocket were the Luzon, but like the Blur, these ones I don't have left-hand pocket clips for. That was a terrible assisted deploy. So I just didn't want to carry these the way I carried the Recon one, because I trust this thing a lot not to stab me. But I have done it with other knives where if you're carrying something in the offhand pocket clip that it's not designed for, the blade's in the front and not pointing to your pocket. So if you reach in your pocket and that's open, if the detent's not perfect, I have sliced my finger open a couple times now doing stuff like that. So I didn't carry these. I thought about it. I really want to try the Blur out. It just, this one does not have a left-hand pocket clip option, so that's a pain in the ass for lefties. Also, I could have tried out the Rat Model 1 and 2, and I really thought I'd try and do this one for a week, but there is something about these knives. I mean, the 2 is just too small for me. That one's easy. It just doesn't quite fit my hand well enough, but I don't have any attraction to this knife whatsoever at all. Same as when I first ever seen it years ago in reviews. When you look at like most popular budget folding knives of all time, the Rat Model 1 and Esee is always pretty much near the top of the list. But it's just so vanilla, it drives me crazy. So for whatever dumb reason, I can't bring myself to use or carry this thing all that much. These are really the ultimate size comparisons because they are two of the most popular folding knives ever. So they didn't make it in the pocket. You can see here on the table, oh, sorry, Rat 2. You can see here on the table, the Izula number 2 was my week number 13 to finish off this challenge of rule number 9s. I ended up carrying it in the Ulti clip, which I had got not too long before that week 13. And I just wanted to try carrying it in my main left-hand pocket as a pocket carry. So I had this attached to the outside of my pocket. This, I could have used the slimmer one. I have a slim one that's on my, it's on one of my Tor Anaconda sheaths right now. But this did show in the pocket quite a bit. Now, when I'm at work and I'm wearing the 511 tactical pants, I've got enough crap hanging off me anyways. It doesn't stand out that much. But with a pair of jeans, this probably would have been a little bit aggressive, but it still carried very well, worked extremely well with the sheath. Although it is a little annoying having something like that in your pocket when you're used to a folding knife. It's a bit much, but having an EDC fixed blade as your main carry like that is so, I'll use it, utilitarian. It is so utilitarian, it is unreal. It's extremely easy to use and put back in your pocket. Obviously, you got to be careful resheathing, and you shouldn't be rushing when you're resheathing because stabbing yourself in the leg ain't going to be good for anybody. So there's really not a lot of drawbacks. Will I EDC a fixed blade like that again? I don't know. I'm so used to carrying folding knives in that position, and my fixed blades are always accessible with my other hand or appendix carry with either hand. So I don't know that I really am ever going to move to that. But who knows? It was definitely interesting to try it out. The Ulti Clip's a great attachment that you can do a lot with and carry in a lot of different ways. I used this on my hiking trip there mid-November, and I just had this clip to my backpack. Like so. So I had this available on my shoulder strap to be drawn with either hand if needed. So very highly recommended. The Ulti Clip and the Izula 2 sheaths are awesome. So this whole challenge was, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but a very, yeah, it definitely took me out of my comfort zone a little bit. I was not really going to do this for more than 4 or 5 weeks. Well, after I missed those few weeks because of the fire trip and I got a couple of these other knives in the mail, I thought, well, I can probably open my mind up a little bit and get used to carrying some other stuff. I did a video back early on in the channel talking about how I don't really like to rotate my EDC knives very much. It was a bit of a weird niche little video, but it was more just how I tend to like to build up muscle memory and all that kind of stuff with my knives and gear. And I don't like the idea of what if that one time I actually got, say, attacked by something or someone, or let's just say I was in an accident and I needed to one-handed reach and deploy a knife to cut a seatbelt or a strap or something. If that happened and I was carrying a knife that I wasn't familiar with and I fumbled it in that situation, and I know this is crazy, but it would just be such a terrible last memory to have that my negligence and, rotating a knife for the sake of novelty is what ended up resulting in my demise. Most of you EDC folks out there are just shaking your head right now, but my mindset's always been towards more like emergency stuff and firefighting and getting into the military and all that stuff. So I maybe a little hyper practical when it comes to that. So this was a little bit of a good experiment to get me out of that mindset and just try some different stuff. That being said, since the end of the challenge, like I mentioned, I carried this for about 5 or 6 weeks, and I've been carrying the Benchmade 940-2, the Super Freak, for the last 3 weeks. And I pretty much am going to go back to my old habits of probably carrying the same knife for about a month or more at a time, because it just feels so much better to be used to a certain knife and know that when I draw it, and I do draw these things often, if you're around me anytime during the day, most of the time I'm just doing practice deploys and all that stuff and fiddling and all that crap. So I like to be able to be used to what I'm carrying and feel comfortable with what I'm carrying and know that in a pinch, I'm able to get one of these knives out and put it to work without having to worry about like small motor movements and potentially panicking and fumbling it in a moment where it really matters. So thanks again, rule number 9, for putting this challenge out. If anyone wants to go and check out the hashtag on Instagram, 13 weeks, 13 knives, you'll see I want to say hundreds, if not thousands of freaking posts from those 13 weeks and all the different people who were posting their knives that they were using. While you're there, feel free to check out the Hard On Gear Instagram if you haven't yet. And again, there's some stickers available. If you're catching this somewhere near the beginning of 2022 or late 2021, I might still be willing to send a few of these out for free and even pay postage just to hook some people up while the channel is still small and growing. And yeah, hit me up on hardongearchannel@gmail.com, or I guess at hardongearchannel@gmail.com, or the Instagram, or let me know down in the comments. Check out the Tuesday hog polls in the community tab. That's been a lot of fun. Let me know if you got any poll ideas, and those will be coming up pretty much every Tuesday after the weekly Monday upload. If you want to get some more content, see some of these knife unboxings, top 5, all that stuff, I think you'll have the top 5 folding knives video over here on the right, as well as probably a playlist above it. And there's the Hard On Gear stamp if you want to go to the channel itself. Appreciate you clicking the like button, subscribing, and all that jazz. Until the next time, this is the Hard On Gear channel signing off.